For years, my friend Andre had dominated the light while I lurked in the shadows. He was one of those fortunate mesomorphs with just the right anatomy for a bodybuilder's physique. I, on the other hand, was an ectomorph, thin as a fishbone and hopeless around weights. While he either wore tight tank tops or shirts, which he took off at the slightest excuse, I wore baggy shorts and avoided every reason to get bare-bodied around other people. This was until I decided to hit the gym. Unfortunately, a month's worth of grueling hard work failed to bring me the changes I desired. So I gave up. Maybe God made me this way. Maybe I was too puny, being a challenge to his will. Maybe I should just accept my body as it was. But the mind is a devil, isn't it? It doesn't accept things easily, especially when your friend is living his best life with the best quality women. Seeing Andre with a new girl almost every other week made me jealous. It burned my heart, and the desire to have huge muscles of my own grew stronger every time I saw him having a good time. "You just don't have the body," he said. "You have to pump your muscles artificially. That's the only way." "You mean by pills and powder?" I asked him. "Your body is too weak to accept all those roids. You won't be able to handle the side effects." "Then what do I do?" There was an easier and faster way. Plastic surgery. It's expensive, but if you knew how, you could do it locally at very little cost. "How do I do it?" "I know a guy," Andre said, and gave me a phone number. "He helps skinny guys like you get buffed up." I was certain I wanted it, so I made the call and met up with this contact. His contact was named Soul, and he seemed to be good at what he did. As a matter of fact, he had a number of guys with great testimonials for his services. So I subjected myself to his needles and scalpels and got injected with just the right amount of petroleum jelly. Just the right amount were his favorite words. "You need just the right amount," he'd say. "It can't be too big, it can't be too small. Just the right amount for your body size. The girls will go bonkers." And they did go bonkers. I had just the right amount of augmentation. My biceps and triceps were now the huge sort that they'd love to hang on to. My chest, the hard padded sort they'd love to lay their heads on. It was then that I began to enjoy a bit of what Andre was used to. My before and after pictures on Instagram blew up my following. Of course, I didn't tell anyone what I had done. It was a better story if I had grown the muscles through hard work at the gym. Everybody loved those who did the impossible. And to make my story more realistic, I did join the gym. I used to click a lot of pictures and post them on Instagram. It was there that I saw her. Her name was Trisha. Post my plastic surgery, I had dated several girls, but Trisha was something else. She was a perfect 10. I hadn't seen such a girl in my life. I knew I had to get her, but there was a problem. There were numerous guys like me in the gym. I had to stand out from them in order to impress her. Once again, I spoke with Andre and asked him what to do. He patted me on the back and told me I was on the right path. Men like us were not meant for mediocrity. We would do anything to get whatever and whoever we wanted in life. We are the highest breeds of animals. "Call up Soul, you dog," Andre roared. With Andre's words and a strong desire to get Trisha, I booked another appointment with Soul. "I will do what you want, but there can be consequences. Remember, it has to be just the right amount." It is the things that we want more than anything else that kill us in the end. Sometimes we know this, other times we don't, yet we still go for it. To hell with consequences. I can't stop, Soul. I am a true animal. Bowing to my constant demand and doubled the payment, Soul agreed to the surgery. He injected me with more jelly and let his knife and scalpel do wonders on my body. What I had always wanted was displayed before me right now in its full glory. A perfectly sculpted body, abs that looked like they had been chiseled out of a rock, biceps that rippled with hard muscles, and thighs that made me think of a smooth rock. I could easily give Mr. America a run for his money. My good time, though, was short-lived. It started to die when the pain began and the muscles started to lose their cohesion. My biceps, which were once a source of pride, suddenly became awkward chunks of thick, viscous fluid hanging from my arms under my flesh. People noticed, and the admiration faded away. In its place, contempt and mockery grew. I stopped going out and started to hide out in the apartment. Still, the disdain of my friends followed me in. They reveled me constantly on my social media pages until I logged out of my apps and began to plan my suicide. One day, Andre came over to stay for the weekend. He still had all of it, and he still didn't mind showing it off before me. There was a smirk on his face now as he posed. "Come on, man, shit happens. Such is life. I know you will be back soon." "Kill him." I flinched. The voice in my head had always had the effect on me. It was the pain or the fever. It had to be. "Kill him." "I'm going for a run," Andre said. "Will you be okay?" he asked me. "As if you care." I nodded. I was not going to be okay. My petroleum jelly muscles were hanging from my arms, a mass of uselessness that had brought me ignominy and suffering. My chest sagged like a 200-year-old woman with double Ds. They were eating up my body from the inside, burning me up with a persistent fever. "Be back in an hour," Andre said, and left the apartment. I laid there on the sofa. He was no longer here, and that made me even more angry than I had ever been. He could go out to anywhere. He wanted to live life the way he wanted. I, on the other hand, was destined for horrified stares and derision. "It's all his fault. His fault. His fault." I jumped. The voices were getting louder inside my head. "They're just voices," I told myself. "Nothing more." Still, they were right. Andre was the reason I had done what I had done. The voices in my head drove me to the internet, and I opened up a site on the dark web where I opened a specific type of poison. They promised 30 minutes delivery. Soon, the bottle of poison was in my room. "Kill him, kill him, kill him." "Stop," I yelled and shivered. "Kill him." These days, it was getting harder and harder to convince myself that they weren't part of an hallucination. I was running a temperature and spending my days in pain. Pain which was becoming impervious to the painkiller drugs. "Kill him." I rose from the sofa and walked shakily into my room. The poison was a colorless liquid in a transparent bottle with no label. I had been assured that it was tasteless and would guarantee a quick and painless death. The sound of the front door getting unlocked floated to my ears. Peals of laughter followed it. It was Andre. He had returned from his run and probably brought back a conquest, someone for whom I must scurry away and hide out in my room, lest I be regarded with horror and disdain. I think this is what made me snap. I stumbled down the hallway past them. Andre said something and the girl laughed again. Before they entered the bathroom, I managed to catch sight of the girl, and it was then that all hell broke loose. I lost all my control, and the voices in my head went mad. The girl was Trisha. Quickly, I rushed to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and grabbed his smoothie. It was the first thing he drank whenever he returned back from workouts. It was supposed to help him with muscle gain. Now, it would bring his end. I uncapped the bottle and poured the poison into it. Then, I sat there on the couch. Seeing my body, Trisha started to laugh, but it didn't bother me. I watched as she laughed and shared a smoothie with Andre. As she saw me laughing back at her, Trisha stopped her laughter. Perhaps she realized she was wrong, but it was too late for her. Soon, they both started vomiting and held onto the stomach with pain. Peace returned to me, but it returned with darkness of oblivion. I went back to my bedroom. Once I was in, I locked the door and fell onto my bed. There, I surrendered my consciousness to sleep and a fevered dream.
Everyone was always commending me for my skill. I was good at it, especially with my lips. Men received the pleasure they wanted, whether it was on their lips or some other part of their body or somewhere else, and my mouth always did the job well. My best friend May even commended me once. Or maybe it wasn't a commendation because it led to a fight. I had slept with her boyfriend. The moron told her I was better in bed than she was. But to be honest, it wasn't my fault. He asked for it. And because I was good at my job, I gave in and gave him all the pleasure he ever wanted and more. May was pissed with me for days. Well, scratch that, her anger almost lasted a month. Now, I broke my ties with her boyfriend because of her, and she broke up with him because of me, but she refused to forgive me for so long. It didn't make sense to me because the guy who got between us was out of our lives. I was so glad when she finally did. She was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I didn't want to lose her. We had been friends since childhood. Being orphans, we grew up as each other's backbone from the orphanage and other stages of life. We didn't have to cut ties for a seamless man. Not that I wasn't shamelessly promiscuous, but it wasn't the same thing. I remember convincing her that I was addicted to all things sexual, and there was nothing I could do about it. No matter how much everyone advised me to stop sleeping around with multiple men at the same time, I couldn't stop. It was my life. It was also for the same reason that I needed lip fillers. I was doing a good job with my lips already, but I wanted fuller and prettier lips. I wanted to give the babies some confidence on their own, but I didn't know where to get the fillers. I'd never gotten one before, and I wasn't vast in that area. May was. I sought her help, and I was glad when she started talking to me like her old self and agreed to help me out. It was like good old days. May recommended a salon. It seemed a bit shady, but the good part was that the services they offered were in my budget. The fillers were inexpensive compared to what I had read online. And the pink beauties became more beautiful and fuller indeed. If my job was simply good before, I became even better at pleasing men, and more of them came to me. My sex life had never been this good. At some point, May's ex returned, and although I didn't tell her, we ended up having sex again. My sleeping around didn't stop, and the lip fillers encouraged me to do a better job. All was heaven, until the first rip. At first, I didn't understand what was going on. One morning, I woke up and was shocked to see my face in the mirror. My lips were bigger than usual and slightly uneven. It didn't make sense. They were normal before I went to sleep. Scared, I rushed to the parlor and confronted the lady who had done my procedure. She told me that this was a minor side effect and would settle down on its own. She had done hundreds of procedures in the past, and the fillers were of top quality. There was no need to be scared. Her words relaxed my mind, and I returned home. But the next morning was worse. My lips had swollen up like giant balloons and were more uneven than yesterday. While I was trying to examine the lips, I found that there was a rip, and pus had started to leak. I screamed and cried at the same time, but I couldn't keep up with it for long because it caused my lips to hurt me all the more. That was the beginning of what I could say was the dark period in my life. Every living moment of mine was full of pain and agony. I could barely look at myself. The sight of my face in the mirror gave me the creeps, and my lips leaked pus all day long. The yellowish, sometimes white-colored liquid irritated my lips, and I felt like I would die. I covered my face and rushed to the parlor once more. I should have known something was wrong from the start. The fillers were so cheap and showed results almost immediately. I should have figured out that I was duped and scammed. The lady refused to accept her wrongdoing and blamed me for creating a scene. Seeing her nonchalant attitude, I proceeded to slap her, but my arm was caught midair by a man. I know girls like you. You just want to have your fun, and when things go wrong, you blame me, you ugly bitch. The man picked me up and threw me out on the street. I didn't know what to do. I was completely broken. The police won't do anything since it wasn't technically a medical procedure. I cried my eyes out. No man would want to sleep with me or seek me for pleasure. I was devastated. Till that moment, it never occurred to me that the one who sent me to that parlor had ulterior motives. May stopped visiting me. Heck, she wouldn't even pick up my calls. She claimed that my house smelled like men, and I was always the one to visit her. A week later, I was surprised that day when May came into my house. But she was less surprised seeing me with big lips that were leaking pus. She looked like she was expecting to see just that. I broke down in front of her, crying tears of my hurt. You deserve it. May spoke in a cold manner. I didn't need any more convincing that she had done it on purpose. She hadn't forgiven me. She didn't forget it in her heart that I had slept with her boyfriend, and she had chosen to destroy my lips in return. She was there in my house, petting me and asking me to stop crying, that it'll be fine, that at least now I wouldn't sleep around with men. She was hugging me, but I could hear the sinister smile in her voice. I could feel the loud thumping of her heart in joy about how I looked, about how horrible she had made my precious lips. I pushed her away. You are a monster, May! I screamed at her to get out! And the surprise was evident in her eyes, until her lips curled up in a mischievous grin. Her mouth formed the words, You didn't expect to simply get away like that after making my boyfriend cheat on me. She winked at me as she uttered the words, and my heart broke into a million pieces. She slapped me hard across the face and pushed me into my bed, leaving me in tears. Now you won't go around sleeping with men with that terrible look. I hope you never get to use those lips again. She laughed and left the house. I went to the hospital the next week. I needed all the help I could get. I may have lost my beauty, but I didn't have to lose myself, too. Although my lips didn't return to being exactly as pretty as they used to, after a few surgeries, the pus stopped and my lips healed. I have never used cheap fillers ever since. I learned my lesson the hard way. Now I'm saving every penny that I can. This time, I would have a proper surgery from a trained expert.
People are fond of saying no one takes a second look or is even bothered about people who are over 60 years old. I turned 60 a few weeks ago, and the eyes still stared, took second looks, seemed to have multiplied rather than reduced or even stopped. It was absurd to think that as old as I was, I still wasn't proud of what I looked like. Sometimes I thought that it wasn't absurd. I pretty much spent my entire life regretting everything about me. I was never proud of my looks and my body. I wasn't proud of my course of study. I wasn't proud of my job. I wasn't proud of my husband and the time I chose to marry. I was proud of only one thing, my beneficial friend. Others called people like him friends with benefits. I thought the world started to revolve around me when Steve became my beneficial friend. He gave it all to me. A listening ear, time, attention, the best advice, interest, and most importantly, pleasure. He knew how to satisfy me, and he gave himself to do it as a friend. It didn't matter, not once, that he was 10 years younger than I was. I was happy with him. He was happy with me, and we didn't have any attachment of any sort. It was all going smoothly. For a while, I forgot my life wasn't something to be proud of. I would have completely forgotten if only Steve stayed with me. Yet, after finding another woman, more beautiful and shapelier, Steve abandoned our friendship to get married to her. And I was mad. It happened coincidentally when I turned 60. That's why I thought more eyes looked at me than ever. It was my shape. I was sure that if I could tweak the abnormal hips, reduce my waist, and get rid of some tummy fat, I would be a better choice for both a wife and a friend with benefits. Not bowing to my current situation, I learned from my unsatisfactory life that this time I thought I would take a strong step to make my life full again. Perhaps that would land me another Steve. I told Joan that I wanted to get plastic surgery. Joan was my closest friend, someone I wasn't proud of because of her heavy size, but she was a good friend nonetheless, one that stood by me for a really long time. She tried to talk me out of it, but we both knew that it was fruitless, no matter how hard she tried. Everyone knew I was adamant about the decision I made. I found a place. I read positive reviews about it online. Most of the reviews spoke about the professional staff and affordable treatment packages. I opted for their most coveted surgeon and scheduled an online session with him. The doctor had a lot of good reviews, and I was so happy that good fortune found me so soon. "Hi, Mrs. Jones. How are you?" "I'm good, doctor." "I see that you're interested in our extensive procedure. You're at the right place, Mrs. Jones. My hands are magic." The online appointment went well. The only weird thing was the doctor asked me to come alone, without anything but money needed for the procedure. I told Joan again, and this time she didn't fight my decision. She was only refusing to be an escort. I told her she didn't have to follow me into the operating room. All she needed to do was to stay out and ensure my safety. After a lot of ups and downs of the argument, she agreed. Having no other choice, I booked my appointment with the doctor. Joan was a police officer, and when I didn't feel safe or unsure about a certain place, I took her along with me. I think it was also one of those reasons I wouldn't let her go, no matter how prideful I was to be proud of her. On the auspicious day, I was in the car, Joan in the driver's seat. We arrived at the street in the description the doctor had given, and I told her to park the car far off while I saw the doctor, and she waited or guarded. I entered the makeshift hospital. There was a small reception, but it was empty. It didn't seem like anyone was ever there. I wondered if the doctor worked as his own receptionist. But I was sure that there had to be a nurse somewhere. He couldn't do the surgery on his own, could he? The idea made me shiver. 2 doors laid in front of me. One was labeled theater, and the other was consulting room. I knocked on the door of the consulting room and met the doctor. He sat on that iconic rolling chair, swirling and smiling at me across the only table in the office. He was the most beautiful human I had ever laid my eyes on. For a while, he reminded me of Steve. His eyes were green, a suffocating emerald green that would drown a woman. Scratch that. It could keep any human trapped forever. His voice was a thick baritone, and I could not believe my mind behaving like a 16-year-old girl giving my way into infatuation. I killed my thinking and tried to keep things professional. I couldn't do it for long. It seemed that Dr. Berry was interested in me too. He commended my hair first, and then my fingers, and finally, my lips. Somehow we lost track of my purpose as his patient, and his purpose as my doctor. His hands were on my face. He was sitting at his table and cupping my chin in his hands. I didn't know when, but he leaned into me, and his lips were on mine in no time. With the same energy, I returned his kiss, and my hands were on his body, around his neck first, before feeling his biceps and grabbing his muscles. My brain, the influx of dopamine, shut out everything that I wasn't proud of as our hands roamed the body of each other. I was wet all over my body, most especially from my waist. I winced, moaned, and groaned. I rubbed my hands on the wetness, and it stung for some weird reason. I brought the hand to my face, and I saw red. I stopped and saw Dr. Barry grin through the kiss. Pain shot through my body, and all the excitement from before died as I bled. I was bleeding. Dr. Barry pulled back his hands, and I watched his long nails plunge into my body, creating 5 holes as blood gushed out. I hadn't seen his nails. I screamed. This wasn't part of the deal. In my mind, I wished and hoped with every fiber in my body that Joan would suddenly be worried and look for me. Dr. Barry pushed me against the wall and scarred my face with his long fingernails at my every attempt to fight. I was helpless, wincing in pain at the holes in my side and bleeding from my abdomen. Aren't you too old for this, Grandma? Bitches like you deserve a... My heartbeat increased to a level I thought my heart would explode. I was so scared. I should have listened to Joan, let go of the plastic surgery, or I should have opted for a regular hospital. I was sinking, slowly giving up for my lack of strength, and then boom, the door opened. Not only Joan, but 2 other police officers launched into Barry's office. He was arrested, and I was freed. It took me a while before my wounds could heal, and the physical ones did. But the whole ordeal proved to be truly traumatizing for me. The whole incident taught me to be grateful for what I had.
The voice of my 3-year-old echoed through the house into the kitchen where I got ready for the Independence Day picnic. The cheer in his voice warmed my heart as well as caused chills to shoot through my body. It was our 3rd Independence Day celebration together, the first without his dad. Somehow, it hurt me more that he couldn't remember his dad was gone than it would have if we were mourning him together. My husband, Steve, died a few months ago in a car accident. It was the most devastating thing that ever happened to me. It was a simple trip from home to his office, but he never made it back home. The driver of the trailer that caused the accident was punished, but that didn't matter. It didn't bring back my Steve. Brian, our son, was all I had. Steve and I got married about 5 years ago. I was only 23 years old. However, we had issues with giving birth. No matter what we did, I couldn't conceive, and it was quite sad. Steve and I tried for a child over and over when we got married. We couldn't figure out what was wrong. Finally, 2 years after our marriage, I got pregnant and gave birth to Brian, a bright boy with blonde hair like his dad's. Of course, he was the pride of the house, coupled with the fact that I couldn't give birth anymore. A fibroid damaged my womb. It was by sheer luck that Brian survived. Brian was indeed the apple of both our eyes. That was the reason it pricked me that growing up, the child won't remember his father who loved him so dearly. "Mama!" His voice rang again from the sitting room where he called, and another smile tugged at my lips. If only for him, I had to put my grieving aside today and live as both Brian's father and mother. I was willing to step into Steve's shoes along with mine for my son. I completed the packing, loaded the baskets, and started to transport them into the car. As I walked past Brian where he played with toys, he looked up and gave me a cute boyish grin. I smiled back at him and continued outside towards the car. From the moment I jammed the boot in place, a strange feeling overwhelmed me. It felt like I was pushed by some force, but I raced back into the house and I understood the feeling that came over me. Brian was gone and the house was still. Weird. Brian? I called multiple times as I checked through the house in search of my baby boy. I went to the kitchen, the toilets, the bathroom, and every single room in the house. I checked the refrigerator, the freezer, the dishwasher, the oven, and the washing machine. I even checked absurd places Brian would never fit in, like under the chair, behind the television, under the stereo. My brain turned in my head. I went back into the room and checked under the bed, inside the wardrobes, and behind the curtain, and it all didn't make sense. Brian was here a minute ago. He couldn't just disappear into the air like a magician, could he? I called his name many times, chuckling like an idiot. You got me, boy. Now come out. But my voice was echoing through the still house. I scratched my hand through my hair in frustration. My eyes were wet with tears. My head banged and my body was aching. After 15 full minutes of searching through the house to no avail, I called the neighbors. I went from door to door asking if anyone had seen Brian, but they all looked at me like I was mad. I couldn't blame them. Steve and I never associated with any one of them. We were people you could describe as unfriendly, friendly neighbors. We didn't have anything to do with any one of them, but we never caused trouble either. Perhaps it was because of the hysterical way I looked that the people who saw me started to get worried, and one of the neighbors called the police to report my situation the way I narrated it to them. The police indeed arrived as families were setting off for picnics, and my Brian was nowhere to be found. My stomach ached and my throat was hurt. I shouldn't have left him, I thought over and over. The police asked what the problem was, and I narrated it to them. I thought it would be absurd to them as it was to me, but the policemen looked more worried than surprised, like they knew something I didn't. This time, I was the one to ask questions. What's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? They asked me to tell them what happened again, and I did. I told them how I was by myself in the kitchen preparing for the picnic with Brian. The sound of his voice that I heard while I was cooking. I told them about my husband's death and how I missed him dearly that morning. I skipped to the part where I picked up the picnic basket, smiled at Brian as I walked outside, and loaded the boot of my car. The way I entered back into the house and my son was gone, nowhere to be found. Since I was in a neighbor's house, the police officers led me back home and said they would search for my son with me. I thanked them, and together we entered the house and they began searching the same way I did earlier. From the kitchen to the toilet, to the bathroom, to my room, and finally, Brian's room. I was waiting for them to be done and concluded my son wasn't there, but it was a different case. In the center of his room, my son was hung like one who committed suicide. His eyes, I was arrested for the murder of my son. No matter what I said, nobody believed me. I couldn't blame them. I was the last person to see him anyway, and there was no record of any person breaking into the house. I was charged to court and found guilty. They said I killed my son out of contempt, and I was sent to prison. I was left alone to mourn both my child and my husband. Life was cruel. A year later, the murderer was caught. It was a similar case to mine, and a thorough investigation was put through. A serial killer who took joy in hanging toddlers on the 4th of July was the culprit. I was released, and the man was imprisoned. Isn't it weird? While people make merry and rejoice on Independence Day, I am filled with sorrow and rejoice at the loss of both my husband and child in such a short period of my life.
The clock at the reception chimed 12 o'clock. It was midnight. The office was quiet. There was always quiet at night. However, that night, the quiet seemed heavy, like some harbinging evil. I had always hated the graveyard shift. I hated it even more now, 1 week after an IT guy died. He didn't have any friends in the office. The guy was a loner. The cleaner told us that the guy was under depression, and his wife left him for another man. The guy was working the night shift and would rarely leave his desk or even the office. 2 days after his death, his colleagues claimed to feel a strange presence in the room as they worked. Nobody took them seriously until Derek, the manager, walked into the room and complained of having the same feeling. Immediately, the whole team shifted their systems and started working from home. But my boss was not so benevolent. In spite of what happened, she told me to clock in every night. I really didn't like her behavior, and nor did I like this company's culture, but with the falling market and zooming inflation, I had to obey. It was unfair that most of the time I was on night shift. However, I just joined here, having only been here a few months, so there was nothing I could do about it. Rather, I willed myself to look on the bright side. I had a job that meant income. I also had great work colleagues. Jeff had celebrated his birthday early that night and asked me to join the festivities. We shared a delicious chocolate cake and cans of soda behind my desk. But now, they were all gone, and it was just me. I took a coffee break, hoping to find someone in the pantry room for a chit-chat, but there was no one. Our office had multiple floors, and it seemed that night that I was the only guy working on my floor. Not sleepy and being in no mood to have coffee alone, I returned to my desk. An hour had gone by, and I was deep into my work. Suddenly, a water bottle on Jeff's desk, adjoined with mine, fell down. It was weird, but I didn't think that much about it. I was so busy typing on the keyboard that I must have rammed the keys a bit too hard, resulting in my desk to wobble. I replaced the bottle right where it was and continued working. Hardly a minute passed by when one of the monitors on the rack fell down. Now I was scared. It might have been or might not have been a ghost, but my boss would probably blame me for the damage. I stood up to pick up the monitor, and suddenly my chair moved towards me on its own. That was it. I was 200% sure that it was the ghost of the IT guy. I ran for my life, only to find the main exit to the elevator locked. I kept swiping my card, but nothing happened. Then I heard a loud crash from one of the cubicles. My heart dropped, and suddenly I turned around to look at whatever it was, but I couldn't see any living person. Stark naked fear gripped me hard. It was the primordial sort that reaches deep into your soul. It reached deep into mine and shook my presence. "There's no ghost here," I shouted. "There's no ghost here." A blur of a dark shadow danced out from the cubicle and sped towards me. It passed my body, straight to the exit, and vanished. At that moment, I thought I was going to have a heart attack, but thankfully life had better plans. I remember that I still had the access card in my pocket. I swiped once more, and this time, it worked. My mind told me to skip the elevator and take the stairs instead. Yeah, it would be much safer. 20 minutes and 12 floors later, I was out in the open. Cold night air hit me square in the face, slowing me down for a minute. I stopped and took a look back at the front door. There was no sign of that thing that chased me out. Still, I turned and kept running until I reached my apartment. The next few hours passed in a rush. I couldn't sleep. I locked my door and laid there in bed, waiting for morning to arrive. I reached the office at 8 and declared to my boss that our office wasn't a safe place to work. I told her about what happened last night. "There's a ghost." My boss, Natasha, frowned. "There was what?" "A ghost!" It was so scary. "You idiot," Natasha said. "Ghosts don't exist, and you just want a reason not to work. Your generation sucks. You just want to freeload everywhere." "I saw it," I insisted. Natasha left the cabin in anger. I was left alone in the cabin, scared and confused. I walked to my work area to check it out. The computer screen was still on the floor, and my chair was still in the same position it was left in. It was pointless to show Natasha this, and I'm sure after seeing this damage, she would insult me. I decided there and then to resign. I knew I would struggle and would probably need to move back in with my parents for a while, but given the situation, it was the best that I could do.
You never know you have a story to tell until it occurs to you, or the story happens to you and you have to tell it. I was in the police station with Vivian, and without telling my story, I knew they would say I was mad. So far, only one person believed me, and that was Vivian. It didn't matter that she was the only one I had told. The encounter that sent me to the station with my best friend happened in a jiffy. I could barely believe myself anymore. I was at a stage where I recounted if I was only imagining it, or if it actually happened. I happened to be on the night shift at my workplace. I wasn't a huge fan of night shifts because I was an early sleeper and an early riser, and doing the night shifts usually messed with my sleeping mechanism. However, I had no choice but to serve nights for a month after every 2 months. I clocked out of work by 5 a.m. and returned home. The good thing about the night shift I had was the holiday that came with it the next day. The day happened to be my holiday for the week. I got home, ate a little, crashed into bed, and caught a quick sleep. A quick sleep because I was awake in less than 3 hours after I slept. It wasn't abnormal. That's what I meant by night shifts meddling with my sleeping routine. When I woke up, I decided to spend my morning watching TV. I jumped in front of the set after grabbing some snacks from the fridge. I snuggled my pillow as my favorite show started. I was blushing in excitement, laughing at the funny scenes and releasing my emotions, but it didn't last for long. The TV screen went off abruptly. It was blank. I tried to push the buttons on my remote in an attempt to turn it back on, but nothing happened. It was my day off work and I was too tired to get up from my place and check the TV. I sat there munching the snacks. I could see my reflection in the blank screen, and that was normal. The unusual thing was, beside me, I could also see the reflection of another person. I couldn't make out their face. I couldn't make out if they were male or female either. I thought it was only my imagination and I didn't react at first. Every other second I glanced over my shoulder to see if anyone was lurking in any corner of the house, but I didn't see anything. The bad thing was, I was afraid, and the worst part was that I didn't dare to stand up or move away from where I sat in front of the television set. I was supposed to be the only one in the house. I didn't share the house with anyone, and I didn't expect anyone to be with me. More so, it was morning and most of the neighbors were supposed to be at work. I wasn't even someone who mixed with my neighbors, and they never visited my house. At some point, I clung to my phone and the TV remote while staring hard at the television. I closed my eyes, hoping that this was all a game which my subconscious mind was playing. After all, I was an anxious person by nature. I hoped that when I opened my eyes back, things would be normal. After a few seconds, I slowly opened my eyes, and when I looked in the TV screen, the person was still there. This time, they were clutching a knife with their eyes fixed on my neck. I shivered in my position and goosebumps were scattered on my frail skin. I lost control and sprung back as I shouted, "Who is there?" I tried to summon courage. I held onto my phone, stood up, and walked to the back of the sofa where I sat. I took small steps around the house, flapping curtains and checking under the table and behind the doors. By that time, I was holding a rod I found in the kitchen. The check around the house confirmed that there was no one around, but as soon as I returned back to my couch, the reflection of the person was still there with the knife aimed at me, staring into my neck. I fidgeted and screamed out, but the echoes of my scream rushed back at me. I was clueless, wondering who was haunting me in this manner. I stood up once more and did another search, but there wasn't anyone. No one. I was thinking of going back to the couch, but a sharp blade caught my neck, pinching my skin. I turned slowly to catch a glimpse, but the feeling faded and there was nothing around me. I screamed. Soaked in utmost fear, I ran out of the house and took a cab to my best friend Vivian's house. Vivian was surprised to see me. I couldn't blame her. We fought the day before, and being the snob I was, I hadn't been talking to her. The scenario that played out in my house was enough to let me forgive her and seek refuge in her house. I narrated the story to her after giving myself some breathing space. She was sympathetic and believed every word I said. That was when she said we should go to the police station and report what I saw. I didn't want to go because I had started to doubt my own story. It felt surreal and impossible, but Vivian was adamant. She said the person could be a serial killer on the loose, and the officers had a right to know that a criminal was in town. I asked if there was a possibility that what I saw was a vengeful ghost or a shadow person. I heard that ghosts who died unfairly tried to take revenge on anyone possible. I had also read about shadow people on the internet. But Vivian dismissed both the ideas and drove me to the station herself. The police officers believed my story to my surprise. They offered to follow me to my house and check around. I agreed, and we were at my house in a matter of a few minutes. As expected, everything was in order at my place. There was no one to be found. After preambulating and investigating the scene, the look in the eyes of the officers convinced me that they thought I was mad like I initially thought they would. One of them didn't hide it when he said I should get myself checked. They left disappointed and I was scared, but Vivian tried to cheer me up. I left the house the next day and went to Vivian's house. I knew I would be safe in the company of my best friend and finally at peace. The time was 9 p.m. when I clocked in for work. My first port of call was the storeroom behind the guard post. That was where we changed from our day clothes into the white and blue uniforms that designated us as security guards. Backspace Corporation was strict about its dress code for the security staff. All the lower-level staff, from the foreman to the factory workers under them, the support staff and security staff, were required to wear uniforms. I didn't like it much, but the pay was so good that I didn't mind. I got this job just as I got out of the Army. That meant that I came with heavy recommendations and immediately got the senior-most position. I may have gotten sick of all the violence, but I had been one of its most feared champions before I applied for a discharge. That was why the company was so happy to have me, and the same reason I was put in charge of security here. I had a sense that most of the other security men didn't like it. They were here before I came in, so they felt one of them deserved to get the spot, but that wasn't my problem. All they could do was gripe. Quickly, I got rid of my jacket and the t-shirt under it and rolled down my pants. As always, my uniform was in its place, laundered and ironed with razor-sharp creases. As I dressed in it, I imagined what would become its fate if we had to handle a situation here. It'd probably end up crumpled, torn, and stained with blood, just not my blood. That thought brought a smirk to my face. A moment later, the smirk froze in its place and turned to a smile. These bastards were all in already. The uniforms were gone from all of their clothes hangers, and in its place, their day clothes. This was the first time this was happening, just when I was beginning to consider doing something about it. I tucked in my shirt and picked up my cap. Time to earn that ridiculous pay. From the storeroom, I walked into the main security office. I shared it with my deputy Collins, who I'd put in charge of the day shift. He was next in line for the position of chief security officer and should have taken over after the old chief left. As evidenced by the spick and span nature of the office, Collins was a neat man. I sat in the swivel chair, which overlooked a wide, long monitor. It was partitioned into 3 different screens. Each of these screens had live video footage of different parts of the office, with multiple camera options available. The security guards were posted in the blind spots not covered by the cameras that fed the monitors. I picked up my walkie-talkie to check their status. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, something on one of the screens drew my attention. It was Cam 3, Screen 2. It showed the main office. It was a big room with an array of desks, chairs, and computer systems. Something weird was going on. A chair was moving on its own in the room. There was nobody behind it pushing it. As a matter of fact, the room was empty. There was no employee at that hour. It slid over the floor steadily, like whoever was pulling it, whatever was pulling it, was taking its sweet time. I blinked and rose to my feet for a closer look. Something was moving now. On screen 1, cam 4, one of the metallic drawers opened on its own and heaps of paper flew out. All these were super important files. And then, all hell broke loose. On screen 3, cam 1, the false ceiling below the metallic drawer room popped open, and all the files and sheets tore through it. This isn't happening, I told myself and shook my head vigorously. I was definitely hallucinating. That was the only explanation. Perhaps a vein had burst open in my brain and was now flooding it with blood. I rubbed my temple hard and closed my eyes, mentally searching for any sign of a headache. There was none. Not even the faintest throbbing. I opened my eyes and looked back at the screen. I knew that no one would believe what I just saw, and the whole incident would surely tarnish my image. It needed to be taken care of within this night itself. I grabbed my walkie-talkie and pressed the PTT. "Post 5, come in," I said. "My name is Jared, sir," Post 5 said. Although it had been close to 2 weeks since I joined, I still couldn't seem to remember the names of the men working under me, so I referred to them by their positions in the facility. It annoyed them, but I didn't care. "Check the main office right now," I said. Do you see anything?" Jared asked. I opened my mouth to talk again, but then decided against speaking. Whatever I had to say would not make any sense to Jared. He'd think I was going insane. No, it was better for him to see it for himself. "Check the office," I said again. "Yes." The acquiescence was thrown at me carelessly. I could swear there was a hint of disrespect to it. That didn't matter to me. What mattered was that the order was obeyed. The attitude would be dealt with later. I watched on screen, waiting for the door to the office to open. It did a moment later and Jared walked in. He stood in the doorway staring wide-eyed at the room and shaking his head. Then he knelt down and put his hands together as though in supplication. I drew closer to the screen. His mouth was moving and his eyes seemed to be wide. Who was he talking to? There was no one in the room. I pushed the PTT again. "Post 5, Jared, what are you doing?" "Please, Dominus, spare my life." Jared's voice was choked with terror. "Please." On the screen, he was now clutching on his throat. He fell sideways and hit the floor, twitching. "Everyone, converge at the main office now," I yelled into the walkie-talkie. Without confirmation that my order had been received, I dashed into the storeroom and grabbed my firearm from my locker. My heart was pounding wildly against my ribcage as I raced out of the guardhouse. The office was big and housed well-guarded secrets. There were tech IPs and whatnot. Whoever this person was, I had to take them out. The lobby was empty as expected, and to the right, the office door was open. Jared lay just inside, unmoving. I slowed to a walk as I approached him. Where are the others? There were supposed to be 6 other security guards here this night, but there was no sign of them here. I went into the room staying low and with my finger on the trigger, ready to shoot. Just as I had feared, there was nobody in the room. I bent over Jared and shook him. "Jared? Jared?" But he did not respond. Jared was dead. Suddenly, someone grabbed me from behind and I fainted. I woke up the next morning with a large crowd around me. Apparently, I had passed out on the floor that night alongside the lifeless body of Jared. The CEO of the corporation was not pleased at all. In spite of me being a veteran, he humiliated me in front of the whole office. My part of the story wasn't believed at all. Only I knew that I didn't pass out, but there was someone there. My job was terminated there and then. 3 months had passed since the incident, and no company bothered to even look into my impeccable resume. Someone at the Backspace Corporation had leaked that night's mess in the industry, and I had become a laughingstock. The next day I received a letter. I rushed to the door hoping it would be a positive reply from one of the companies I had applied to. Strangely, the envelope had no mention of the sender. As I opened the envelope to read the contents of the letter, I couldn't control my anger. Hope you are doing well, my friend. Chief Security Officer Collins. I hated night shifts for just one reason: boredom. That didn't mean I didn't do them. Sometimes I enjoyed it for the same reason, because I could think, maybe read a book, and do some personal stuff since there was no one to be careful about. This was the only reason until 10 years ago, when I had the most bizarre encounter at a particular night shift. At that time, I recently moved to Kansas City. I loved that it was a nice town, and I believed the crime rate wouldn't be so large as to meddle into my life. I got a job at a gas station, and since it was on shift, sometimes I got the night shift. On one particular night, I was at the gas station, minding my business and making sure the few drunkards that sauntered in every once in a while left without causing any trouble. It wasn't much of a struggle though, but that didn't make it fun either. There was barely anything to do or anyone to sell to in the middle of the night. At midnight, one man came into the station. He looked sturdy and his eyes rather unfocused until they settled on me. His breathing was steady as he monitored me, checking me out from head to toe. He smacked his lips and searched my eyes and face. I'm pretty sure my irritation was evident. Of course, he looked like another drunk to me. As if he had his fill of me, he walked out of the station and didn't look back. He didn't buy anything either, and that was enough reason for me to conclude that he indeed was a drunk. Perhaps it was another unidentified reason I hated night shifts. I was barely 22, of course. I wasn't a lover of the sight of drunk men here and there. The night ended quickly, and before I knew it was 5 a.m., and I clocked out of work. I drove home in my vehicle, careful not to fall asleep behind the wheel. I didn't have to try too hard. My empty stomach did a good job of keeping me awake, plus the nice May weather and comforting darkness. I arrived home, and the house was just the same way I left it. It didn't look like I had anything to worry about. I hurried to get some food for myself, wanting to solve the hunger pains that still refused to give up. I was as hungry as I was sleepy. As I got the food from the kitchen, I heard a bang from the back door, but I wasn't bothered. It was windy outside and it was morning. There couldn't be anything. I grabbed my food and ate quickly, eager to satisfy the sleep that my eyes and body longed for. After all, I deserved a good, peaceful sleep after such a long night. When I emptied my plate, I went into the bathroom and took a quick shower. Someone once said that a quick shower relaxed the body and caused a person to sleep faster. True to it. Once I climbed into my bed, I fell asleep. But not for long. I would have said the person with the shower theory lied, but it wasn't the shower or the theory. It was the husky voice that called out to me loud and clear like it was in my room. "You're even prettier without makeup." I started shaking with fear. The owner of the voice stepped out from wherever he was hiding. He was wearing a purple hoodie and his face wasn't visible. "You're prettier without makeup," he repeated. I would have screamed, but at that moment, I recognized him as the man who was at the gas station the last night. Although his face was covered, I was able to identify him by the color of his clothes and his stature. At that moment, I quickly grabbed the bat at the side of my bed for protection. I was weak in the knees and every amount of strength in me was attached to the bat I held in my hands. I was speechless, afraid, clueless, and anticipating the worst. Summoning some more courage, I took my phone and started recording. I also threatened the man with the resolution to dial 911 and report my situation. The man chuckled. "What are you doing in my house? Get out of my house! Get out of my house!" I screamed. I was successful in startling him, and the man dashed out of my house through the back door. Only, before he left, he smiled and said, "I know where you work and live. Remember that." And he zoomed off, not turning back once. Chills scrambled through my spine and goosebumps filled my skin. My mind couldn't help wondering what he would or wouldn't do. I checked the windows and locked the doors of my house, and then I rested. Everything went silent again. I was completely exhausted by this whole ordeal, but sleep was hard to come by. Eventually, I waved it off and maybe would have waved it off forever, but when I woke up the next day, there were flowers at my back door. Roses. The roses came every day. Every one, without missing out on a single day for the rest of the week. I didn't need to be told that the new stalker was none other than the man that showed up in my room some days before. I decided to endure, but an end came to my endurance when one morning, instead of roses, I saw a plate with a sharp knife. It was my cue to leave town. It didn't matter that I hadn't stayed for so long. I wanted to be gone because it seemed like I would never be rid of that man if I remained there. I was scared of death. I moved back to my hometown after a few weeks because I was also sure that the cops would never find this man. And even if they did, I didn't want to be the trap that caught the mouse. I moved on with my life. I thought I was free, but in the last 10 years, this man found me on my social media pages. I was forced to delete all my accounts and abandon social media for good. It's still funny how that one encounter fueled my hatred for night shifts, and it's changed my life drastically. I didn't hear if that man was caught, but every day, I pray that he is caught and punished before an actual person falls as his victim.